Well, greetings everyone, and thanks for tuning in. I think it was probably about a year ago, almost to the day, that I gave a presentation at a conference in Victoria regarding our sea level rise project. And it was in a stairwell after that someone, I know not who, thrust into my hand the brochure from the 2018 FCM Sustainable Community Awards. And they said, you should submit for one of these. And my response was, well, maybe I will. And we did submit, and a year later, here I am speaking to you as the winner in the climate change category. So I'm delighted to be able to tell you a little bit about our Rising Seas project. My name is Chris Osborne, and I work in the Long Range Planning Department at the City of Campbell River. For a little bit of context, for those of you who don't know the West Coast overly well, Vancouver Island, Campbell River is located halfway up the coast on the east side on the beautiful Discovery Passage. And you can see a view below of the city that's taken from the water looking west towards the mountains of Vancouver Island. And what you need to know about Campbell River is that it is very long relative to its width. So we're a linear view community, and that means we have a lot of exposure, coastline exposure to sea level rise relative to our area. And further, we also have our downtown located adjacent to the estuary of the Campbell River, which puts our downtown in a flat, low-lying bowl. And you can see from this beautiful photo how low-lying and flat our downtown area is. And this photo was taken during a high tide on a lovely day, but it's also where this overall sea level rise project began quite a number of years ago. More specifically, it began in the downtown park, right in the middle of our downtown. That's a longhouse structure there, and I'm about to take you down into the park, probably around where the tip of that red arrow is. On not such a nice day, I'm going to take you there on a day following a very large storm in 2012. And the park looked like that, and you can see huge amount of debris throw from a gigantic storm. So this was 2012. City Council had to decide, okay, what are we going to do? Obviously, we need to patch up the rock armoring that's been damaged, but we've heard about sea level rise. We know it's something that's going to get worse with time. We probably need a plan for how we're going to deal with this in the long term. Just before I go into that, I do want to talk a little bit about the wave effects, because sea level rise is something that you don't notice most of the time. And to illustrate that, here's a couple of photos that I took a couple of years ago at one of our boat ramps. And again, just for context, there's my menswear catalog alter ego stood at the top of the boat ramp looking down. And then when I took the top photo, I was stood in the boat ramp looking up. So that top photo was during the king tide. It was at the peak of the king tide. So that's the highest tide of the year. So that's the moon making the tides rise and fall. The water doesn't really get any higher than that. And it doesn't look too bad. It's on a calm, placid day. If you imagine a meter of sea level rise on top of that, it doesn't seem too bad. But the picture below was taken only 2 weeks later during a significant storm. And you can see that the water has pushed that berm of debris right up to the top of the ramp, and it's in danger of going over the road and flooding those apartments behind. And the important point is that the base tide level during the storm was a foot lower than the picture you see in the top. So had this same storm happened 2 weeks earlier, you have to imagine all of that bottom picture shifted up by 1 foot, and that would clearly have breached the road. And then on top of that, you need to imagine up to 3 feet of sea level rise over the next 80 years. So you only really notice sea level rise, not even at those high tides, but during a storm event when you have a high tide. And so it creeps up on us in that regard. So faced with repairing this damage, council decided to give staff some money and say, okay, we need to get serious about planning sea level rise. We didn't have any particular expertise in-house. We didn't really know what we were doing, but we had to start somewhere. So I started at my usual place for commencing a project, which is to hire a co-op student, because they're exceptionally good value for money. And have helped us deliver a number of our projects. So together, me and my co-op students set out on a desktop exercise to establish some reasonable guesses for what a flood level might be under storm and sea level rise conditions, doing some research online and data that should be available to anyone. And then we created some flood levels and put them on top of a topographic map. And you can see here the result of that exercise. So you can see the implied flood inundation along the bottom of the screen there. And then you can see in our flat downtown area, that big blob of flooding. And then zooming in a little bit there, you can see we were able to get some contour information in that. And at this point, I kind of toyed with the idea of switching colors because, of course, when we show flooding, it's always in this lovely tropical blue. And you think, well, that's not too bad. I can roll my trousers up and wade to work sipping my Mai Tai. But of course, the reality is that the floodwater is it's brown and stinky and garbage strewn. And we did actually experiment with representing this in more or less pleasing colors. And eventually we kind of took the cowardly route and stuck with the water equals blue convention. The next thing was to go out and conduct a survey of those areas that we'd mapped. So provide a ground truthing to what was inside those areas and create a visual record of the back of the beach. So this was the students, like the core of the students' work, and she did this over a 6-week period in the summer, where she went out and walked the entire 14 kilometers of our urbanized coastline, and she took photos of everything that she saw. So there she is. And she was recording things like this. And what we see here is this funny long rock thing. And that's not actually rock, that's a concrete cap over the top of one of our sewer force mains. And you can see it's in pretty ropey condition. Yet that's a significant piece of city infrastructure buried under that flimsy cap. Clearly that is something that's vulnerable to flooding and erosion. More erosion, this is a more cliffside area of our shoreline, and you can see on the left evidence of a failure there, slope failure. And on the right is one of our sewer outfalls, and it's at an angle that it certainly wasn't built at. So you can see there's been a lot of ground movement. City infrastructure at risk from erosion there. Another storm outfall, and you can see the end of the pipe has really been concertinaed by debris being thrown against it in high seas. The final picture, quite inexplicably, is a dead roasted pig. So she certainly saw some interesting things on the beach as well. But doing this enabled us to compile a database of everything that was potentially at risk to varying degrees from sea level rise. And then we were able to start to put some dollar values on that and create some headlines. So these were the headlines that came out of it from this crude preliminary exercise. We estimated about $750 million worth of property were potentially exposed to these flood impacts. And for a municipality our size, that's an extraordinary figure. We are simply not used to speaking in the hundreds of millions. Campbell River's annual municipal budget is in the order of 60 to 70 million. Directly city-owned assets, so that's things like sewage lift stations, water hydrants, etc., $71 million worth. No less than 35 parks, that's fully half of our park inventory exposed. And finally, 586 residential, so privately owned parcels, plus a large number of commercial parcels as well. So these headlines really enabled us to start to put some parameters around the problem, get some attention, and define the next stages of the project. So we then worked to expand our funding. So we took the money that Council had given us, and then we were able, with the help of our funding partners here, we were able to expand that figure into just over $500,000, able to start to do some serious damage with that. So it was time to move beyond our amateur efforts and commission the experts. So we brought in a firm of coastal engineers, Northwest Hydraulic Consulting, and they carried out really detailed technical analysis of the whole of our foreshore. So this is just one image from one of their reports, and this is a wave height model. So they're really looking at the heights of waves relative to the shoreline during a storm event, and you can see it's almost on a parcel by parcel scale of analysis. And that enabled them to create a short list of options for different things we could do to mitigate the flood risk in different areas. Noting that there's a lot of variety in our coastline, meaning that different interventions would be suitable in different areas. So here's an example of where they determined that creating these mini headlands and pocket beaches behind would be an effective flood management technique. Wouldn't necessarily be applicable everywhere. And after having done all these analysis and produced these short lists of things that we could do, that was kind of where the engineers and specialists were left off, and it became more a values-based discussion. So that's when we started to overlap public participation process with the technical one. And we started off by asking people what they valued most about the shoreline. And the shoreline value exercise really showed that people were most interested in having access to it for recreational purposes and for the ecology. The environment was important to people. And important to state that they gave these values a higher rating than they did cost or indeed flood effectiveness. So then we were able to take this feedback and start to create approaches for different areas, responding to those values. And a couple of very simple examples here of responding to those is taking your traditional engineering heavy solutions, things like seawalls and rock armoring, and alternative approaches could be to add material to the beach in the form of beach nourishment, or create a living shoreline, which is a small barrier further out, creating conditions behind that are suitable for marine species to thrive in. Now, those may not necessarily be as effective as the engineering solutions, and they may be more land hungry, but they are certainly better in terms of ecology and access, and people undoubtedly preferred those. So in this way, we were able to start curating approaches in different areas. So going back to that same area I showed with the wave height diagram, our engineers were able to start deploying these different measures according to public preferences. And so one concept was a combination of those kind of soft approaches for reefs and breakwaters, still having engineering approaches where there simply isn't the space or the conditions for other things, and combining that with a regulatory approach as well. So in that way, we can kind of build up our plan for what we're going to do. Another big component of this was in the youth outreach, but part of the public outreach. We thought it was very important to prioritize youth, working on the philosophy that the youth are those who did the least to cause climate change, but who will certainly suffer its greatest impacts. So we really took our sea level rise concept out to all ages, as it were, and you can see on the left our terrain models that we bought, and we used ice cubes on the hills of those terrain, and then blew a hot hairdryer over them to model human-induced warming. And the school children were able to see how that led to water accumulation in the bottom, and how that started to inundate and overwhelm the lower parts of the model. We also used that in combination with some further information to engage our youth action committee to give feedback to council from a kind of mid-teenage perspective. We went out to the high school and the college, and we also went beyond to Vancouver Island University, and we were able to develop modules for their course based on climate change and sea level rise, using Campbell River as a case study example. And finally, in collaboration with VIU, we also held a public consultation session, open to everyone. And you can see yours truly there presenting at the lectern, along with a climate specialist from VIU. Just before I wrap this up, one other important component of outreach, in addition to youth specifically, is First Nations specifically. And our neighbours, the Wewak First Nation. You can see in red there is the reserve area, adjacent to our downtown and wholly within the Campbell River estuary, very low lying and fully within the flood risk area. And many of the engineering interventions that were identified cross over those reserve boundaries. Clearly the floodwaters are no respecter of jurisdictional boundaries. So really key that we work together with other neighbouring governments on finding a common solution. So we took all of those things and we've packaged them up into Campbell River's first ever sea level rise action plan. And having taken the public through this consultation process, this came in front of Council in February this year, and Council adopted it unanimously. So we're looking forward now to where the work really begins, and that is walking the walk and implementing the actions we've got in that plan. So I'm going to leave it there. My name is Chris Osborne, and I'd be very happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you.